I'm 53, and for most of my life, I believed love had a time limit. It felt like something for the young, the wild, the impatient. Something full of fire but never meant to last. Then something happened that challenged everything I knew about connection, about myself, and about what it means to truly feel seen. Please, don't make the same mistake I did. The day started like any other quiet spring morning. I was out in the garden by 8 and by a.m., wearing my straw hat and thick gloves, kneeling beside my tomato beds. The sun had just risen enough to warm my back, and the scent of damp earth and budding flowers wrapped around me like an old friend. I was humming, probably something from Fleetwood Mac, thinking about how much more planting I had to get done before the afternoon heat. Then I heard footsteps behind the fence. "Hey, Miss Callahan," a voice called out. It was soft, but low enough to startle me. I turned and smiled, brushing some dirt off my knees. "Haley, that you?" He stepped around the gate, tall and lanky, that mop of chestnut hair falling into his eyes. 18, maybe 19 now. He had his father's eyes, but his mother's easy smile. I'd watched him grow up next door, from a shy little boy kicking soccer balls into my yard to the confident teen he'd become. "Yeah," he said, grinning. "Mom said you might need help out here. I've got a few hours before work if you want an extra set of hands." Truthfully, I did need help. My lower back had been sending me warnings for weeks, and the thought of lifting more soil bags made me wince. But I hesitated. I didn't like bothering people, especially not kids his age. "I couldn't ask you to do that," I said, waving him off with a dusty glove. He shrugged. "You didn't." I gave in. He was already stepping through the gate, pulling off his sweatshirt to reveal a fitted t-shirt underneath. Thin, but strong arms already smeared with smudges from who knows what. Before I could argue further, he was hoisting a bag of mulch like it weighed nothing. "Where do you want this?" he asked. I smiled, shook my head, and pointed to the flower bed near the back fence. For the next hour, we worked side by side in a rhythm that felt strangely natural. He asked questions about the different herbs I was growing, whether I liked living alone if I ever got bored. I asked about his job at the hardware store, what he planned to do after graduation, and whether he still played guitar like I remembered. He laughed barely. "I mostly mess around on it now, sometimes just to think." That struck something in me the way he said it. Like music had become less about impressing girls and more about making sense of things. I understood that. We took a break under the shade of the old pear tree. I poured us lemonade, and he sprawled out in the grass while I sat on the wooden bench. "I like it here," he said, looking around. "It's quiet, peaceful." It is, I agreed. Though some days it gets a little too quiet. He looked up at me then, not with pity, but with something else. Curiosity, maybe, or understanding. It caught me off guard. "You ever think about doing something different?" he asked. "Like just getting away from all this for a while?" I blinked, caught between surprise and some vague ache that his question stirred at my age. He chuckled. "We're not that old." "He says the boy with knees that don't crack when he stands up," I teased. He grinned, then went quiet for a moment. The wind moved through the branches above us, scattering light across his face. "I don't know," he said, voice softer now. "I just think people stop chasing what they want way too early. My mom, she's kind of like that. Always tired, always doing for others. But I think she wants more." I looked at him closely. "And what about you, Do you know what you want?" He hesitated then, with a steadiness that surprised me. He turned to me and said, "Sometimes, and sometimes I don't even know if I'm allowed to want it." I didn't know how to respond to that at first. There was a weight in the air that hadn't been there before, like something had cracked open between us. I felt the edge of it resting against me, warm and uncertain. "Wanting something doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong," I finally said. "It just means you're still alive." His eyes met mine. They didn't flinch. For the rest of the afternoon, we didn't speak about it again. But something had shifted in the way he moved closer when he handed me tools, in the way our hands brushed when we both reached for the same trowel, in the quiet glances that lingered just a bead too long. By the time the sun dipped low and the sky turned a soft lavender, I thanked him for his help and walked him to the gate. He stopped just before stepping through and looked back at me. I'm serious, Miss Callahan. Yes, his lips parted like he was about to say something, but then, just as quickly, he shook his head and gave a small smile. Nothing. I'll see you tomorrow. I nodded slowly. A nodded sign. He walked off, and I stood there, hands still covered in dirt, heart quietly pounding in my chest. What was I feeling? Curiosity? Guilt? Excitement? I wasn't sure, but I knew something had changed in the air in him and in me. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed with the windows cracked open, the soft chirp of crickets drifting in along with the scent of the lavender I'd planted beneath the sill. Normally those small comforts would lull me into a gentle sleep, but not this time. My mind kept circling back to Eli. His voice, the way he looked at me, the things he didn't say. It wasn't just the garden work or his help that lingered in my thoughts. It was that moment under the pear tree. That strange current in his voice when he spoke about wanting things, but not knowing if he was allowed to. There was something so raw about it, so familiar. When I was his age, I used to feel everything so deeply. I remember looking at the world and wanting so much freedom, passion, understanding. But I was always so careful not to step too far outside what was expected of me. Marriage, a stable home, routines. I followed the rules. And yet, somewhere along the line, I stopped asking myself what I wanted. Maybe Eli's words echoed because they reminded me of that old silence I'd buried. The next morning he was back. I hadn't asked him to come. I didn't expect him to. But there he was, standing at the garden gate, wearing the same work boots, holding 2 mugs of coffee like it was the most natural thing in the world. "A good morning," he said, smiling, handing me one of the mugs. I thought I'd beat the heat. I took the mug, still warm in my hands, and tried not to look as surprised as I felt. "Thank you," I said. "You didn't have to." I wanted to. We worked in silence for a while after that, a kind of silence that feels aware. Every movement was slow, deliberate, like we were both trying to keep the peace we'd found the day before without waking whatever tension had started to form beneath it. Around mid-morning, I pulled off my gloves and sat down on the edge of the raised bed, brushing a strand of hair away from my damp forehead. Eli sat next to me a little closer than yesterday. His arm brushed mine. I didn't pull away. "You always been into gardening?" he asked, picking up a small spade and turning it over in his hands. I nodded. "Since I was a girl. My grandmother had this wild patch of land behind her house. She called it her sanctuary. It was the only place where I ever saw her laugh." "That's what this feels like," he said, glancing around. "E's sanctuary?" I looked at him. He wasn't just being polite. He meant it. "Most people think it's boring," I said. "They don't know what they're talking about." He leaned back on his elbows and let out a breath, eyes closed, face tilted toward the sun. There was something so open about him in that moment. That was always what got me with Eli, his steadiness, the way he never asked for more than I could give, but always offered more than I knew I needed. I touched his cheek. "I don't know what this is, but I know it matters. If we didn't label it, we didn't have to." From that day on, things didn't get easier. They got more honest. We became quieter in public, more careful with our timing. Not because we were doing something wrong, but because people rarely understand things that fall outside their idea of normal. And I wasn't interested in defending something so deeply personal to people who would never take the time to truly see it. But in private, we kept nurturing whatever had grown between us. He helped me repaint the I helped him apply to art school, something he'd never had the courage to do before. We challenged each other, inspired each other. We grew together. One evening, as the first hint of autumn colored the leaves, and the garden began to soften into its final bloom, we sat by the fire pit. The sky was soft with stars, and a cool breeze carried the scent of the herbs drying on the windowsill. Eli pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders and said, "You changed something in me." I turned to him. "You reminded me there's still something worth changing." He kissed my forehead gently, reverently, and for the first time in many years I felt completely whole. Not because of a label or a definition or anyone else's expectations, but because I had let myself feel again. I had let the quiet stirrings of connection lead me into something unknown. Something alive. I don't know where it will all lead. Maybe one day it will fade. Maybe it will last. But I'll never regret the day he stepped into my garden